I don't remember. We can hope about 2K tomorrow. We can hope. Let's see. Are we all up and running? Are we up and running? Let's see. Does it work? Please be working. Hello, hello, hello. Hoping this is working. Yes! Got the notification I'm live on YouTube. Congratulations. Thank you from to Blue Shirt Buddha. I won't give you the full victory dance, because the full victory dance was something like this for quite a long time. But it went long. By the way, t-shirt today, as we all know, is Historian by Day, Pirate by Night. I thought you'd all enjoy that. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, right then. I'm going to have to break something to all of you. Basically, when I took on the landing craft project, my theory was some other people must have done some work on it and all the other things to actually get into it. They hadn't. So currently it's 34 slides long. And that's just the ones I've put up online. I have another 30 odd slides on amphibious ships. So, what might happen? What might happen is that I might do as much of this as I can today, but I might well do another special and possibly a third special continuing this on, because there is just so information which hasn't got out there about landing craft. I'm going to try and introduce as much of it to you as I can today, and thank you very much again to all the people who are following me. Thank you to all the patrons who are going to be contributing to my future research trips, because that's definitely where that money is going to. And very much thank you to all the people who allowed me to do the victory dance on the phone to my aunt. By the way, that was a full military operation involving my mother and my sister as well. You know, we had it set up my phone first. Then my aunt, when my aunt turned my phone off, my mum rang her. Then when she closed my mum's phone off, my sister rang her. And then we rang my uncle, and he put the phone onto her. So she had the full dance. Silly question time. Stephen McCallie, were there ever any purposely built landing craft types during the Age of Sail? We're going to get into this. Pretty much. But before I start everything, though, I'm going to preface it as two things. One, this is based off a lot of the research my dad had done. I haven't gone through his actual research. I've gone through the books he left. He was a naval architect, and what he used to do, well, we had an interesting relationship over the years, at one point including me holding up against the wall and threatening to break every bone in his body when I came home and found him hitting my mum and sister. So, you know, it's a up and down relationship. But we got closer towards when he died, and he used to come to National Archives with me, and he was researching a project on landing craft and amphibious warfare while I was doing my PhD and some of my later work. Anyway, this book he got me. This book is amazing. And if anyone wants to donate to me, I have a Patreon account. I'm always happy to take donations because, as I said, it goes to my research trips. I'm an early career researcher. I might be used by a lot of universities, but I'm on the lowest rung of the payroll, and frankly, I know it. Currently, my main university has forgone 30 hours of pay for a lot of this month, so I'm having fun. But luckily, we're all trapped at home, so I wouldn't be spending it anyway. Now, this book. If you've got this book like Force A1 has, then you're very, very lucky. If you haven't got this book, then if you can find it, do track it down. It's absolutely amazing. And what I loved really so much about it going through this was, compared to a lot of the history books I found discussing it, this is written by the engineers who are actually building and designing the landing craft, actually with the person chairing the paper being given, being the person who was in charge of all of them, Director of Naval Construction, Stanley Goodall. And it explains a lot of the things behind it. Now, as I've said at the beginning, there is a massive lot. So my plan is to work through this for about an hour and 20 minutes and then take questions. However far we get to at the hour and 20 minutes mark, if we do get to the end, great. If we don't, I will sort of take some questions as I go through, as I normally do, but there'll be a proper question session at the end. Hello, Golden Eagle. Hello. But if we don't get to the end of all the slides, and if we don't get into the actual shipping, we just get through the landing craft. Yes, Jeff, it actually has got Admiral Henderson in it. Even I didn't realise he'd been involved in this, but he was. Hello, Alex Hunt. It is, you know, we'll be doing, I'll do other specials because I haven't yet planned the specials for May. So I'm happy to do another one on Sunday or maybe even tomorrow if you'd all like it. But basically comment below this one if you prefer it on Friday or Sunday when it's live, if you would like it, the rest of it given. So, anyone who's been watching my Twitter feed will have seen the pictures coming out. Now, I'm going to start off with some iron brew because I'm going to need it. Now, we're doing landing craft today. That's what we're going to focus on because they have been completely forgotten even more than the landing ships. And the landing ships have forgotten enough. This is what you have pre-World War One. Okay? Pre-World War One, this is what your landing craft is. It's ships' boats. And they're perfectly decent. They are definitely perfectly decent. Ships' boats are actually very good. They're very useful. Because they're carried by every ship, and most of the landings that's actually taking place are not under fire. They're not being actively engaged by the enemy. And this is the thing. The Royal Navy have managed to use them a lot over the years. So, when Gallipoli starts, the boats being used in Gallipoli are only a few generations newer than, as Carl Gunn has correctly guessed, Wolfe's was using at Quebec. Simply put, they work. The trouble is with Gallipoli is two things. One, they have told the enemy they are coming. Two, they helpfully pointed out where all the weak spots were for the enemy. And three, the enemy's prepared. Oh. Okay. What I do love is after World War One, Henderson writes several assessments during World War One. He is Jellicoe, when Jellicoe's at the Admiralty's go-to staff officer. He writes the assessment which provides the basis for the introduction of convoys. He writes the assessment also of the naval failings of Gallipoli. We're starting to get a real idea of what's going to be coming on later in this. So, the reason you don't get contested landings much before World War One is because the range of weaponry available to the enemy, the speed you can move these around, means you don't usually get that sort of support to contest the landing. You can usually land your troops, and by the time the enemy realizes you're there. So you're landed, you're ashore. You've got your cover for getting ashore because you've got your troops there. Gallipoli goes wrong. Gallipoli goes wrong very badly. But actually, it's quite clever because what the Royal Navy does is the Royal Navy's arguing with the Army going, we need something to get you guys in there better. The Army's going, no, we're getting in fine. The Navy's going, we're losing our ships and men getting you there. We need something to get you in better. The army eventually, different general comes along. Yes, we need something to help us get in better. The Royal Navy goes, don't worry, we've converted London barges. Now, London barges are something I know quite a lot about. The reason I know a lot about them is because in the 1970s and early 80s, the most recent generation of London barges were designed by a naval architect with the same surname as me, i.e. my dad. And he was obsessed with the history of London barges. And X-lighters were so similar to the London barges of generation. They basically provide the generation of London barges which operate through most of World War II. They are that similar. They are that capable that many of them are brought back and are used for that. They are very, very good. Now, the London barges that they use are, they take the strongest design they have available, they stick armour on them, they manage to get 5 knots of speed out of them, and they send them in, and they call them X-lighters. And before we get any ideas, no, they do not in any way inspire the view of an X-wing or an X-fighter from Star Wars. In many ways, actually, though, they might be more airborne. But leaving that to one side, they are incredibly useful. Now, here's the thing. They are used for Gallipoli, and then after Gallipoli, there aren't really that many operations. There is the Baltic when they turn up again. But, and here's the joy of this one, the Royal Navy doesn't get rid of them after World War I. They keep them going. They keep using them because they're useful and they're practicing amphibious warfare. So, fast forward out of World War I, and I have fast forwarded out of World War I. I do apologise, but there is a reason. This is landing craft alone. Landing craft alone are 34 slides. And the reason it's 34 slides is because everywhere I've gone for sources, for information and material, I have found absolute twaddle. So I've actually devoted an entire slide to the interwar years. And I will post these again. They're already posted on my Twitter feed, but I'll post them again on my Twitter feed, as I always do, because I've got through to the first 4. Now, here are the traditional perspectives that I have found, the 3 key ones. After Gallipoli, the British forces were so traumatised they ignored amphibious warfare. Squabbling over who would pay for landing craft meant nothing happened. There was no one to build against, so no urgency. Okay. One question just come in that interests me. How different are London barges with others? They are very big and sturdy. London barges were made to go almost into the ocean, so they're actually quite good for dealing with choppy waters, which is why they're picked. They're quite solid and reliable anyway. And most importantly, there were also very large production facilities already churning them out, so they could do them. And just answer another quick question on Gallipoli. Being a Skywalker rock, Gallipoli being a failure was super useful and largely shaped what late interwar Japanese and World War II landings in both Pacific and Europe were. Yes, but less than you'd expect, because the Japanese were paying close attention to what I'll be talking about in a second. So, Golden Eagle, Dr. Donald Clarkson Clark, what exactly failed in the naval phase of Gallipoli? I feel that they Anglo-French fleet could have still carried on to and bombarded Istanbul despite the casualties. They could have, but more what failed was they didn't want to suffer any more casualties. So going back to now we're in the interwar years. These are the myths. They're wrong. The reality. In 1924, the Landing Craft Committee was set up as an inter-service group. There is both an Admiralty subcommittee and an Army subcommittee of this committee, and they meet regularly. They have the 3rd Sea Lord and the Army's equivalent officer on it, and they do all sorts of very, very high-level stuff. Motor Landing Craft 1 was ordered in 1924 was designed and constructed in service by 1926, i.e. a landing craft was of a type which would be used in World War II, was actually ordered in 1924 and was in service by 1926. They had yearly exercises of amphibious warfare on the south coast. Yearly exercises. And in 1938, the previous committee was disbanded and a new Inter-Service Training and Development Centre was set up. This is in 1938. Does anyone want to guess which primary person was the person who decided that this new committee was going to get set up because the old committee had got rather stale and boring? Yes, you're correct. He decided in 1937 and he kept arguing for it, and after a year the army gave in and let him form a new committee, a new organisation. That is Admiral Henderson. Now, before, and I keep seeing this coming up, Skywalker Rock, oh yeah, I know, Gallipoli shaped the entirety of Japanese amphibious warfare. It was their defining point. Actually, for more important for the Japanese, and I'll be getting into this, was the experience at Tsingtao and their attacks on the Germans there. But also, there was their watching of what the Royal Navy was doing in the Indian Ocean. Now, let me just tweet out the slide notes. Just make sure they come out while I remember, because otherwise I'll forget them, and then you won't be able to read this, and it's really quite cool. And I don't do all this slide stuff for just sort of thing. Basically, then, and slide set 2 as well while I'm here. So, both slide sets are now just literally out on my Twitter, as well as all previous slides are out on there. Now, it's actually pronounced Xingdao, a golden eagle. Yeah, I do realise this, but the trouble is I learnt my pronunciation off the 1920s and 1930s video reels I've watched, so I pronounce it very badly. I do apologise. Now, first starters is Henderson gets his old friend Roger Keyes back to run combined operations. This is what he's doing, okay? And Jay Inworth, I will be doing so. That is my plan, to write a biography of Henderson at some point, once I get the family and everyone on side. So, there are exercises going on in Ceylon. Now, you can't read this, but I want to read some of the points to you, because this is they take place, by the way, in 1924, when they set up the committee. So this service, which apparently is taking no notice of amphibious warfare, which doesn't care about this, sends out Admiral Richmond, who's a bit annoying sometimes as a historian, but is actually a fairly decent admiral at points in his life, to write a report. Point C. The type of landing craft was also considered, and in view of the distance which the convoy had to steam before arriving at its objective, it was considered self-propelled lighter would have to be carried by troop ships. The general requirements of such a lighter would be to be of such a size that it can be hoisted in a lifeboat's davits, and shall carry 1 platoon. 2. To be as light as possible, and yet to be capable of keeping out a rifle bullet. 3. To draw a maximum of 2 foot 6 inches, and to be punch-shaped forward. By the way, that will pretty much describe half the landing craft we'll be talking about. It is going to be really strange, some of the stuff I'm going to be talking to you, because this stuff should be well known. Because the amount of times you see in movies landing craft being used wrongly, the amount of times history books, I didn't notice it till I was doing research for this, skip over what landing craft are actually being used. The amount of LCTs come in 8 different types. And yet, most of the time, I see books referring to as landing craft tanks were used. Which type? There's a big difference. This is about the Indian War exercise, though, and what they were developing. This is the peacetime in 1924. Now, the difficulties of landing in a strong tideway, 4 knots, was experienced. Boats were driven broadside onto the beach. Ample landing space was therefore necessary. Okay. F. The need for a very effective control of naval gunfire was stressed, and that any fire carried out by ships should be direct fire. Destroyers were being called in for this. G. The large amount of motor transport and heavy guns which accompany a modern expedition need a special landing facilities. Note there were 1,600 MT landed for this operation, metric tons landed for this operation. 2 proposals were suggested: that a ship be moored head and stern off the beach, and that a ferry brought out in sections should be employed in transporting the metric tons and good guns to the hardway, which would need constructing on the beach. Second proposal was to the effect that a jetty could be constructed of sectional barges and barges capable of being towed. In the event of a steep to beach, the bottom of the barges would need to be constructed to as conform to the soundings of the beach. By the way, has anyone ever told you that the Mulberry Harbours are a new idea which they come up with in World War II? Because, if I'm not mistaken, G.2 there is describing a Mulberry Harbour. This I actually knew about, but I had forgotten about this report. And H. This is in 1924 they're writing it. The need for providing strong anti-aircraft defence should the enemy be able to attack the anchorage was considered. This could be provided in some measure by the arming of anti-aircraft guns on a larger number of transports. In 1924, the Royal Navy is writing a report which sounds like they are planning a World War II amphibious warfare operation. This is the service which traditionally in history books is considered to have been ignoring amphibious warfare. The Army's also getting involved in this. So, what happens? Well, these are what are going to happen. Please take a look at these lovely pictures. And by the way, for those who weren't online at the time, I really do want to stress, if you can get a copy of this book, you really should. Because it is incredibly interesting, some of the stuff in here. I know it looks boring, but especially if anyone does any model building and likes to build their own scratch-built models, which I haven't ever tried, but I do sometimes consider. This is good. For the exercises in Ceylon and the British Indian Army turning up for them, they had 2 brigades of British Indian Army taking part in those exercises, and they took part yearly. Okay, so yearly, the British government are conducting 2 massive amphibious operations. They have one on the south coast of the United Kingdom, and they have one taking part in India. They have all sorts of operations going on to try and test them out. And that information is being gathered. At every single one of these operations, there is a naval constructor sent out to see what's going on. The biggest problem that comes through is the development of landing craft and the selection of landing craft, because the Royal Navy doesn't know what to buy. Alex Hunt, same brigades every year. For the Indian Army, it certainly was. For the British Army in the UK, those exercises seem to be in different brigades, and not always. But for the Indian Army, it was often the Gurkhas. The Gurkhas were, in many ways, our first proper amphibious troops. Don't tell the Royal Marines that. They might get unhappy. But basically, while the Royal Marines were being used as shipboard landing parties and small groups and small detachments, much as they're talking about using today, The Gurkhas were the brigade-sized amphibious force in the Far East. Now, so this is what the Royal Navy was looking at in 1924. This is what came into service. The motor landing craft. It's cute, isn't it? Now, it was built by J.S. Whites and Cow, and it displaced 16 tons, had a top speed of 4.75 knots. Yes, it's under 5 knots. Ooh. And design was revised to include either the carriage of 100 troops or 12-ton tanks. Golden Eagle, at Dr. Anderson Clark. Gurkhas. Mountain troops are the first amphibious troops. That Gurkha brigade, one of the Indian Army's Gurkha brigades, was the one which seemed to, from what I've been able to gather on the exercises, seems to turn up every year. There seems to be a couple of battalions from there. In the Ceylon one. In the UK, in the South Coast ones, they were very much the British Army. Yes, the motor landing craft is very World War II-y. In fact, it serves most of through World War II, and is critical to things like Operation Claymore. Well, in variations of it. Now, the main problem for the Royal Navy, and the reason they don't start ordering tons of these, is because as they start to evolve, and I'll tweet out some more so you guys can all catch up with the images if you aren't quite there. Just doing this quickly. And that's, so that one, and that one. Now, so hopefully these three will all have come up on my Twitter feed, so at AC_Naval History. And we'll get to the Higgins boat, don't worry. So, this is what the landing craft, this evolves into this. The landing craft mechanized. And the reason it evolves is because the army needs a bigger landing craft for its tanks. When they're first looking in 1924, 1926, 12-ton tanks are good. But by the time you're talking about, in this case, 1938, they are looking at needing 14, 16, 18 tons for tanks. And it is in 1938... can't think, who was the third Sea Lord in 1938? Wouldn't have been Admiral Henderson. Decides that the Royal Navy needs to finally go for one and start building them. So these are the landing craft mechanized. And they are 40 foot, 4 foot, 8 inch in length. They have a beam of 14 feet. Fully loaded displacement is 36 tons. Hoisting weight 21 tons, speed 7.5 knots. They could take a tank of 16 tons, and they had a crew of 6 men and 1 officer for every 3 craft. So, this is what the Royal Navy was now building. This was the critical thing. And this was for vehicles, okay? It was realised this was for vehicles. But it was for a 16-ton tank. And it was critical in Norway. It was critical in lots of operations coming up. Now, so this started in 1924, has evolved into this. But also preserved one of the most important and critical landing craft built in World War II. Alex Hunt. Wait, 6 men and an officer per 3 units. Yes, 6 men and officers per 3 of the landing craft mechanized ones. That was what they were operating with. These are the assault landing craft. These would have almost 2,000 of them built. In fact, 1,929 in total is the most accurate figure I can find. There are some differing figures. Basically, the Royal Navy gets two designs put forward. It nicks the bits it likes off one design, puts them in the design it prefers, and the DNCs revamp it and build it. And it gets built a lot. And it, along with the Landing Craft Mechanized 1, the LCM-1, and they are used at Dunkirk, are built quite in a large way. Well, this one, by the way, these, which were used by the Royal Navy, were built by Great Western and Southern Railways. So they were built by the steam train companies. The Royal Navy needed them chugged out in a lot, and this is the starting of the amphibious invasion force, which goes to Dunkirk. They build hundreds of these things, and they build thousands of these by turning them out as quickly as they can. These had a length of 38 feet, weighed 9 tons, and could basically be rammed anywhere. They did use landing craft in Norway and around Narvik, and these were what were being used. So these are Generation 1. These aren't all that are being ordered, though. Henderson is Henderson. And as we said, Henderson wrote the report on amphibious warfare for Jellicoe. Post-Gallipoli. Meet the landing craft support. First ordered in 1938. There's an argument as to when it was ordered in 1938, but definitely Henderson and Stanley Goodall were key in putting it forward. After trials with prototypes, several of these, i.e. they took the assault landing craft, what they're producing a lot of them, and they armed them with guns. Mainly machine guns. And Juno 191, when you say rammed, do you mean beached? Yes. The Royal Navy was using these were basically the vessels they were going to use for fighting. What's interesting about the landing craft support is they build them on the LCA. Now, theoretically, they're not supposed to beach, but they actually do beach quite often to provide support to the troops. In fact, at one point, on an operation in Norway, a particularly annoying machine gun mount this was a commando raid, was causing trouble for the commandos, and the Royal Navy officer decided it was annoying him, so he slammed this so far up the beach the commandos ended up having to push it off because it managed to get out the water. Yeah, he basically gunned it and went for the beach at 7 odd knots. Now, let's do set 4, because I have someone fun to introduce you to him, and I want to make sure you all get to see the image. Because, now, 6, 9, now, as you know, I talk about NAMSOS quite a lot. Mainly because I've read Major General Carlton DeWert's book, and frankly, it's worth it. And anyone who calls their life a happy odyssey must be having fun when it's him. But his senior staff officer in NAMSOS was Lieutenant Colonel Peter Fleming, older brother of Ian Fleming. So yes, the elder brother of the guy who came up with 007 was at NAMSOS. So you have Major General Carlton DeWert, and you have the elder brother of 007. You have the person who Action Man is modelled on, and this guy. Now, there is a question which came up here, which was, Colin's dad, Dr. Clark, what did those landing craft have for self-protection? Not a lot. Some of them would have stuff, but some of them didn't. Now, what were the lessons from Namsos and taken from other operations? They were, troops needed to get ashore quickly. They need to be able to take their equipment with them. They need fire support. They need air support. They need to be able to work in tandem with the Navy. One of the interesting things at Namsos is at one point, a Royal Navy aircraft carrier, and I think it's I think it could actually be Courageous, but I'm not 100% sure. Could be Inglorious. But I think it was Courageous. Comes in really, really close. Really, really close while they're operating in Norway. When I say really, really close, actually manages to make it into the fjord. And that is the only day they have air defence. Otherwise, they are dependent on some 40mm guns which are being landed, and they're not a lot of air support. And the tribals. So, they're having a long, long time. What is they are really putting forward these things and dealing with the issues of the fire support. And they have to have a lot of fire support to start supporting these troops and so on. But also, the thing I'd really like to draw all your attention to is I have summarised the reports from several reports, but especially Namsos I've used as the basis for this one. It's exactly the same as this report from 1924. So, Sheppy 42. Think how useful if they crammed an 18-pounder on there or a mortar or two. Wait on that particular idea. The Royal Navy has a similar idea. Yes, it was glorious. It wasn't courageous. I know. I'm sorry, Jeff. I have been dealing with a lot of landing craft today. Now, these are very similar reports. And they are they are coming in. Now, what comes off from them is the first order that's made is for this. Yes, it's the Higgins boat. Yay! It's Higgins boats. And the Higgins boat is pretty cool. Now, one of the interesting things here is, again, you have a very interesting story going on. Because if you listen to the traditional story, the Americans order it first, and the British then pick up off the American order. If you read the story that the British have... Now, if you read the story that the British have, you will find out that what the British say happened is they went down there to look at Higgins and look at his stuff. They were decided to make an order. The Americans went with them. Americans liked what they saw, ordered it, and then so the Americans had ordered after the British had ordered, before the British had ordered, but they only realised what Higgins was doing after they'd seen it with with the British. The important thing about them, they could carry 30 men and go 18 knots. They could safely get you there. And, okay, just to keep you waiting around till we get to the end, because you keep going on about 17-pounder guns being cool. How about 25-pounder guns? Anyone? But that's right at the end. Now, the Higgins was a very successful design, and it was going to form the basis for a lot of things. But it's not the only one which is going on, and it's not the only time this happens. So, slide set 5 should be going to come live now. Should be, he says. Me and TweetDeck have a fun relationship. It's along the lines of love, hate. Now, I have actually, because frankly I like the way he's written it, I have actually just copied the story of the landing craft mechanized Mark III from the book. Now, the reason this is an interesting story, and again, I'm saying it's already 40 minutes have gone, as I've said, and we are up to slide. I hate to think how close. Let's put it this way. We're up to slide. Slide 10, roughly. So, yeah, I think there will be an extended tomorrow. Okay. So, as you all seem to say, Friday was better than Sunday. If this does end up going over 2, I will add a second part 2 up tomorrow. And we'll do the landing craft again. And I might well do the amphibious ships themselves, either on this Sunday or a Sunday coming. Now, this are the stats. The landing craft 3 was originally looked at in the spring of 1941 because the US Marine Corps was preparing for combined operations which involved putting tanks ashore. Now, the Marine Corps paid a visit to Higgins Yard. Ah, yes, Mr. Higgins, again. The Marine Corps made an order, but didn't really like it, of some converted tugboats. The Royal Navy went along, saw it, went, ooh, that can lift a 30-ton tank. Which made the Royal Navy very keen on it. The Americans then went, ooh, we'd like some of those too. So, this is why the landing craft Mark III becomes one of those critical units for the navies across the world for amphibious warfare. They had a length of 50 feet, a beam of 14 feet, had a full load of 52 tons, a hoisting weight of 22 tons, and they took 3 men and 1 officer to man each individual one because they were that much more complicated. But they are cute, and they're the landing craft mechanized Mark III. Hello, look at these pictures. As you can see, this is the spread of landing craft you have being built. Yeah, Calvin, it's pronounced Marine Corps, not Marine Corps. I know. Sorry. Old habits die hard. Now, the Royal Navy are now still looking into these things. And remember what I said about Henderson being important? These landing crafts so far we've all looked at are all ones which are going to be loaded on landing ships. Okay? They're all the ones which are pretty much going to be protected and looked after. And we are going to do, I think I'm going to have to do another special on landing ships at some point because they are an entire another area which has not been looked at. It's one of those things where I can do this, but usually I can have other sources that I can go to sort of tell you to go to fill in gaps which I can't cover. But looking at the sources around on this stuff, it's all very much very one-dimensional history, which is not really any help. Anyway, so we have the landing craft tank. Now, LCTs are the criticals for moving things. And I'm fairly sure I have a friend here who's watching who's obsessed with Valentine's tanks. And, well, their tank load originally was 3 Churchills or 6 Valentines. Now, once you got Mark IIs, they could take 7. And Mark IIIs, 11 Valentines or 11 Shermans. They had a crew of 2 officers and 10 men. They were first studied in 1937. Then, when the war was supposed to be just taking place in Europe, they were put to one side. Now, here's the traditional story. The traditional story of landing craft is that suddenly in 1940, the Royal Navy says it needs them. And in June, they say they need it. In July, they have a meeting with the builders. And in November, the first one is launched. It's amazing. It's a miracle. Up here, though, as you notice, I've referenced the fact they were looking into a similar design in 1937. There's actually, I can trace some of the designs back to 1936 in an early study put forward by the then third Sea Lord at the time, Admiral Henderson. I sound like a broken record on this, but on this occasion it was him and Chatfield and Stanley Goodall putting forward it. But the Army said you'd never have any need for them, because their first study was that they have to be able to carry at least 3 40-ton tanks. The Army in 1936 didn't consider a 40-ton tank ever likely. The Royal Navy thought it was likely because the Royal Navy was looking at how it was growing its destroyers, how it was growing its cruisers, how it was growing everything. So the Royal Navy thought 40-ton tanks were likely. In 1936, the Army didn't. So this is what the Royal Navy were building. And these are really important. They're really important because they are what are being are going to become the basis for all the future amphibious invasion fleets in World War II. They are the critical for getting your ships out. Also, there's some really cool stories because they were deploying them across the Mediterranean to the eastern Mediterranean. They thought they would need them out there for Greece and Crete and these sort of things. And what they did was they put them into sections and put them on their ships. And they had them on sort of bigger, faster merchant ships to get them out there. And when the merchant ships got sunk, the sections of these landing craft would float off. And recently, they actually found a section of one of these landing craft on an island that no one realised it was there in the middle of the Mediterranean. So a section they reckon it must have floated around about 150, 160 miles in the current. In its section, has landed on the island and is still sitting on that island to this day in the Mediterranean. So they're really quite cool. Now, I have a little bit of section up here from Operation Claymore, and I'm going to make sure that goes live now. The reason I'm doing Operation Claymore is because it's pretty darn useful for what I'm going to be talking about because of the lessons which come through in it. So slide set 6 should be going live about now. He says, crossing fingers and praying. Now, what I've done with this is I've actually taken some excerpts from the book I'm writing on tribal battle and daring class destroyers. And yes, I'm going to plug it. It's out in December, according to Amazon. Now, the reason I'm talking about this, though, is because the whole story of these landing craft and what's going on is they're using the landing craft we were discussing back at the beginning. They're making use of assault landing craft support, and landing craft mechanized. These are what are being used in this operation, and they are critical to the commandos getting in. But there's also a real experience coming through. One, they don't have enough fire support to look after them. They need more fire support. At one point, they are worried, and there's actually a radio call, where the Marines ashore and the Army troops ashore are calling up HMS Somali, which is providing fire support time, and telling her to get back further from the shore because they're worried she's going to run aground. The landing ships, and I talk about them in this, and this we're going to get, so that's why I will probably do another session on these, because it's going to have to be another session to cover them all. The landing ship infantries that were used were converted Dutch passenger ferries. The reason they used converted Dutch passenger ferries is because the Dutch weren't going to be around to complain about it, and neither were the companies. Basically, in the nicest way, the Royal Navy was going to use ships it had available, which it could get the easiest. What also was good was that these ships particularly, and similar ships which the British themselves owned, they had plenty of design sitting there about and able to be used to basically take on. Now, they had no track landing craft or anything at this point, but what they did have was a lot of fire support from tribal class destroyers, and they had these lovely 2 passenger ferries, HMS Queen Emma and HMS Princess Beatrix. Now, actually, they then go on to other classes and they get into them, but I want to do another special, I think, on those, because that's a whole nother thing which needs to be looked at. So, what happens after Claymore is that information gets emphasized, but also in June 1941, Crete happens. Now, if we go back to Namsos, there is an army officer saying they need air protection and air support. If we go back to the 1924 report on the operations in Ceylon, the exercise, they need air defense. After Crete, they decide the only way they're going to get enough air support for landing craft close enough inshore is to convert some LCT-2s into flak vessels. And they load them up with pom-poms, with 40 millimeters, with 4-inch high-angle guns. Everything they can get, they load onto them. But the thing is, the moment they start doing this, they realize they can load them with a lot more. So these become the air defense systems that they can use. These become the air defense systems that are critical for supporting amphibious operations. And they build a lot of them. But let's consider this. It has taken exercises in the interwar period. It has taken Namsos and all the stuff in Norway. It has taken Claymore. And it has taken Crete for them to finally get the landing craft flak. What is most interesting is that the Royal Navy are experimenting with a barge like this, I think, because they're looking at what they're talking about it doing, during one of the exercises in Ceylon. So they are doing it. And they have all these things that they are looking at and they are developing, but it takes a time for them to get the money, to get the interest, to get them to put in. Because you always have the theory that you're going to have other things there. You're always going to have the theory you're going to have gunboats there. Well, you don't have enough gunboats. You're always going to have the theory that we're going to have destroyers there. Well, you don't have enough destroyers and you're going into beaches where you don't want to get them that close. You're going to always have the theory you're going to have sloops there. Well, we're not going to have enough sloops. Corvettes, all these things. They're going to have to be using other things. So what are you building in large numbers? We're building landing craft. Let's start using landing craft. And I will say this, there is a great argument going on in the messages about tank guns. We will be getting to tank guns, believe it or not. They are relevant. But I'm not sure if we're getting to get to them in this part of the talk. I think it might be part 2 tomorrow. Because we're not even halfway yet. In fact, we're not even a third of the way. So, the Royal Navy is building a huge amount of landing crafts, landing craft tanks 1, 2, and 3, and 3. In fact, 3 is just being churned off. They are the critical. They are the numbers which are going to provide everything. But the Royal Navy doesn't think it's going to get enough. So they decide to build a stripped down version. Leaner, meaner. Still able to take 300 tons of tanks. So yeah, you're going to get a lean, mean vehicle with 300 tons of tanks being able to carry. Actually, what is interesting is that they have a length of 187 feet, beam of 38 feet, fully loaded, they're 586 tons, they can go 10 knots, and their tank load can be 6 Churchills, 9 Valentines, or 9 Shermans. Sheesh. They are heavy. What I always love, the story I have, and I have it put up here, is of these Mark IVs, is that after European operations, it's decided that if you're going to send them to the Far East, they need to be tropicalized, they need to be strengthened. So they start adding more placing onto their sides, they build up their bulwarks, they build up their bottoms, and they've got all this done quickly, and they're sending them out, and they're arriving in India, they're getting ready for the invasion of Singapore, and the retaking of Southeast Asia, and the invasion of Japan, all these plans, and the war ends. So everything is being pushed forward to get these there. And now, you've got all this stuff focusing going on tanks. But honestly, that's not the only thing going on. After experience in Norway, the Royal Navy also gets rather worried about its landing LCAs. Its LCAs are lovely. They're brilliant. They're beautiful. They're really not good on shingle beaches. They are wonderful. They're amazing on beaches, on beachy beaches. For some reason, for a thing which has been designed based off information gathered of exercises in the south coast of England and on the lovely beaches of Ceylon, they're very good at landing on sand. They're not very good at landing on stony, rocky, shingly beaches. So, what do? You come up with the landing craft medium. Now, this becomes pretty important as time goes on, but the landing craft personnel medium. And it's ordered in August 1941, and it basically spends most of its time supporting commando operations. Now, before I carry on, you'll have worked out that I have not managed to speak much of Dieppe. That's because, honestly, it doesn't teach the Royal Navy anything it doesn't know, other than, A, don't try and seize a port, which they'd already figured out in some of their Ceylon exercises, and B, that Mountbatten really shouldn't be in charge of combined operations. Dieppe was not really an operation which was well planned in terms of thinking about what opposition they were going to be facing and how they were going to be getting the troops there and what troops they were using. It was a lesson in everything that shouldn't be done. And it was also a lesson that there is a level of raiding which you can't do. And it's the same to this day. When we're talking about raiding, you're meaning light operations, very small forces going in light and fast. If you try and raid with heavy forces, you're not doing a raid, you're doing an assault. And that's a very different circumstance with a lot more firepower needed. And yes, Ian Fleming was involved at Dieppe, like his brother was involved at Namsos. So, what comes out next? The landing craft support medium. This is ordered in spring 1942. And this is because the landing craft support, the ones I originally pointed to, have turned out to be very good landing craft, not so good gun platforms. Okay? It's the same experience as with destroyers. Remember, I talked about destroyers, that the reason they grow and they get larger and broader is if you want them to actually be good gun platforms rather than nimble torpedo attack craft, they need to be more stable, which means they usually need to be bigger. And this is what happens. And this is partially also as a consequence a bit of the EP, because frankly, the EP doesn't, as I said, teach anything really that they hadn't already learnt from other operations. It gets spun as being critical, as Skywalker Rock has written, for Normandy to succeed. But honestly, the lessons they learnt at the EP, they learnt elsewhere, and they would learn again at Torch and other operations. They would see far more confirmed on successful operations. The EP was more just in a way, the EP is useful because it proves to the people who hadn't been believing the lessons of the previous experiences that the lessons drawn were correct. That is the joy. So, the LCS Mark II wasn't successful. The SS Mark III is built. And this is a far more well-armed system. But also, it's a far better, more stable hull. And it works well. Now, the Royal Navy, though, was still very much thinking about raiding, especially in 1942. They weren't thinking, these vehicles we've all talked about so far are also a significant section of what they're building up for an amphibious force, an invasion force, and the need to get back into Europe. But that's not all they need. They're also looking at amphibious raiding. And this is where the landing craft infantry large comes in. 200 fully equipped men at a speed of 17 knots was what was required, otherwise known as the giant raiding craft. Let's make sure we get this one out. All right, so let's see. That's 1, 2. Now, that should have just appeared on my Twitter feed. Now, the landing craft infantry large, otherwise known as the giant raiding craft. Okay. Unfortunately, they were so big, they actually conflicted with destroyer construction. So they're sent across to the Americans to build. And they come in at a length of 158 feet, 6 a beam, 23 feet, and a displaced fully loaded 384 tons. They can achieve 14 knots. And they can carry up to 210 men. And they have a crew of 24. They are massive things. They are very, very big. They are supposed to be for raids. The idea was that 2 or 3 of these could rush in, land a load of commandos. They could storm the beaches, do what was necessary, and get back. It'd be brilliant. They are colossal. Has anyone ever really thought about trying to be stealthy in something which weighs 400 tons? And can only go 14 knots? And Ian Carr, in answer to your question, here's betting Henderson was also responsible for the smaller Hunt class destroyers. Bingo. They had a lot of fun. A lot of fun. So, here are some pictures for you of the various landing craft. And as you can see, this is what they're starting to develop into by this point in World War II. This is what the Royal Navy are starting to look at in 1942. Okay? They're starting to develop. And again, you can trace their lineage back to the interwar period. So I really want to shoot down the myth that the Royal Navy in interwar years aren't doing anything to do with amphibious warfare. They really are. Gunboats and all these things, the landing craft which can fire are a development of gunboats and sloops and what they use for in exercises because they know they need them and they develop them when they can't get enough of them. So, right. So let's take it this way. You have a small problem. Your landing craft support is useful, but it can't take on a tank. What do you do if the Royal Navy? And if the Army are still not supplying enough tanks for amphibious operations, because the Army still thinks they need to capture a port first? It's perplexing. What do you do? Jonas King Sparta, why are these designs getting progressively bigger? Aren't they more flexible small? You'd think that. But you've got two strands of landing craft. You've got landing craft which are going on landing ships, and the landing craft which are supposed to get themselves there. And the thing is, the landing craft which are supposed to get themselves there are rather easier to get there. Okay? This is how the Royal Navy deals with not getting the tanks. They build the landing craft support large. So, the armament of the ones produced ordered in December 1940. Strangely enough, designed and introduced by May 1942. First class ready in 1943. They were armed with a 2-pounder, a Besser, a 4-inch smoke mortar, and 2.5-inch Vickers. They weren't really keen on them. They weren't enough. So, what do you do next? Well, you work on the next one. And after concluding that a 20-ton boat can't stand up to a 40-ton tank, because the first one weighed in at 24.5 tons, you guessed it, this is what the Royal Navy work out. Let's build a new one, which will be 105 feet long, rather than 46 feet long. Displaced 116 tons, because if a 20-ton boat can't stand up to a 40-ton tank, a 116-ton one can. And will arm with a quick-firing 6-pounder tank turret, a 4-inch smoke mortar, 2 Hurricanes, 2.5 Vickers, and give it a crew of 25. That's that one. Okay? This is the attempt to take out tanks on 25 tons. This is the attempt to take out tanks on 116 tons. Neither worked out brilliantly, but they are trying. It's the Royal Navy going, hello, we're here. You're not going to kill our army, boys. Now, you have those landing craft getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You have this one getting smaller. This was supposed to be a follow-on from the LCA. Juno 191 will get to the attaching of rockets to landing craft. We will get to that. This actual landing craft will sound out to be a very good idea and is actually in many ways in concept the forerunner of the modern rigid raider. But due to the fact that the LCA was already being mass-produced in huge numbers, they decide that they're going to just go, right then, we're not going to build that many of these. And they end up being more used in sort of riverine operations and in harbours and helping out. God help us all. Seriously, the Royal Navy and some of their ideas in World War II. I mean, I'm on the slide set 8, I think. And that's just about to come out. And of 11. So we're doing quite well. You're being kind to me. You're not you're not torturing me too much. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. So 18. So the landing craft support large should now be visible. And the next set are just coming up. Now, here's the thing. We've just been over these, which were built in America because they conflicted with destroyer construction. Well, that sort of annoyed the director of naval construction, Stanley Goodall, because it meant he couldn't keep as close an eye on them as he liked to. And, what do you know? Fairmile were very kind and offered to build something in the United Kingdom, which would be similar. Fully loaded, 110 tons. Pretty cool. Capable of 14.5 knots. And what's interesting, I find, is that some of these have their horsepower measured in brake horsepower, i.e. car power, vehicle, aircraft power, that sort of thing, rather than ship horsepower. The reason they have them like that is because they were the engines they were using. Some used actual ship engines, many used others. Now, Schleppy 42. Anyway, isn't the best counter for enemy tanks Warspite or Texas on call just offshore? It would be that their turrets often don't respond quick enough for the damage they're going to do. Usually it's a Royal Navy destroyer or one of these armed landing craft. So, the moment you've all been waiting for. With the invasion of Sicily in front of them, and with the experience of Operation Torch, Dieppe, and so many other things behind them, confirming the lessons they'd already managed to work out in the 1920s and 30s, but had managed to try to ignore, or thought they could do with other things. The Royal Navy went, right then, let's take our LCT-3s and LCT-4s and add destroyer guns to them. Welcome to the joy of the landing craft gun, large, Mark 3 and 4. They're quite cute. Pretty much they're adapted. Conversely, that's the LCT-3 and that's the LCT-4. Because that's the one which looks sort of which is the LCT-3 becomes the Mark. LCT-4 becomes the Mark III. The LCT-3 becomes the Mark IV. Just to confuse the life out of us. And they carry 4.7-inch guns and pretty much blow everything that gets in their way out of the water. Orlicons, everything you can think of. They are designed to get in close. Now, theoretically, and please take this as the correct way, they were not supposed to beach themselves and provide fire support that way. They were supposed to cruise close to shore as they could get without beaching. In reality, quite a few of their commanding officers seem to consider beaching quite a good idea, and they really do get close to shore and start pummeling the enemy from as close to them as they can get them. One, actually, to get to its designated target, managed to beach itself to within 10 meters of the target. So you got 4.7-inch guns from firing at you in your pillbox from 10 meters away. For anyone who thinks that the machine gunners in that pillbox were not there after the ship had arrived, you'd be sensible, because if they were absolutely insane. We have the landing crafts Mark 5 and 8. Now, these are slightly different. For starters, we've been talking about landing ship tanks and the great big landing ships. Well, this is what makes them work. So, when you're talking a landing platform dock and all those, this is your forerunner of what we now call your LCU. Okay? They can get up. And they will provide it. What's interesting, though, is the Royal Navy is also taking the idea of its LCTs 3s and 4s, combining their best features and producing a 900-ton fully loaded vessel that can carry tanks for a long, long way, because they're looking at the Far East. So this is being designed for the Far East, and it can take 8 Shermans. It has the accommodation not just for the 3 officers and 19 men of the Navy group, but for the military, 6 officers and 36 men for them. These ships are very much designed for long-range assaults, and they're looking at the Far East. They're looking at the Far East experience and what they're going to need. Now, $15, $18, $21. I don't know. Right then. So, now, before anyone thinks that the Royal Navy goes, 4.7-inch gun, that's good, that's enough. That's enough firepower, that's what you need, that'll do. No. No. Meet the landing craft gun, medium. Weapons load either 2 17-pounder or 2 25-pounders plus 2 single oricons. They were designed from the scratch up based on landing craft hulls. They were fully armoured to withstand fire from anything, and they theoretically could have taken a punch from an 88mm in certain places at certain ranges. And basically, this was not really fun. They actually arrive after D-Days happened. And so you'd think the Royal Navy really disappointed because they were designed for D-Day. What the Royal Navy does is it goes, fine, strap on some fuel tanks. We're sending them out to the Far East. Why are they putting 17-pounders and 25-pounders on them? Those are the best tank guns they have. Pretty much, as Juno 101 has basically put it, so basically it has 2 Sherman Fireflies strapped to it. Pretty much. 2... I have pictures of it somewhere. I will track them down on here somewhere. Oh, there you go. These are some of the pictures of them. And these are the fire support landing craft, and they are just brutal. They are really, really brutal. Now, sort of comes out a bit bad, but landing craft tank rocket Mark III. There is an actual study in the National Archives I've read where someone writes, the LCT-2s are impractical for this purpose as they can only carry a mere 792 rocket projectors, whereas an LCT-3 can carry 1,080, or eventually they would carry 936 and 2 Oricons Mark IIs. This was 1,000 rockets turning up, so in the nicest way, whilst they don't really have the range of an MLRS, they... Who wants to be on the receiving end of 1,000 rockets? Come on. Who here would really like 1,000 rockets coming to you? And by the way, one of these is, there is a story I haven't been able to check here because, of course, I can't go to National Archives because of COVID-19, so I haven't been able to do my usual backup check. But I found a little article written somewhere on the web, and I've now lost the link, but it described one of these ramming itself ashore so it could guarantee hitting its target at point blank range. You don't need to do that, okay? It's 1,000 rockets. As long as you're aiming in roughly the right direction, they are going to destroy it. Definitely destroy it. This is what writing this has done to me. So far today, I've managed to get through an entire bottle of 2 litre of Iron Brew. It's just, you know. What rockets? Various marks. The upgrade as they went along, they were pretty heavy. They were pretty much the heaviest the Royal Navy could fit on them, and they really were trying to go heavy. I have the full details written in here. This is why I kept this book out. And again, I'm going to say this book is absolutely excellent. Originally, the release of the rockets drenched an area of 750 yards times 160 yards with one rocket to each 100 square yards, 10 by 10. If high explosive, the charge was 29 pounds and 7 pounds. The burster, the total weight of explosives being 17 tons of explosive over the area, which would go off within roughly 3 seconds. So, 17 tons of high explosive drenching an area pretty much of a football pitch. There isn't going to be much surviving. Now, here's the Landing Craft 7. And this is the last landing craft which is really sort of ordered and entered service in sort of at the end of World War II. And it is being designed as the Mark 7. It is being designed for the war in the Far East. And these are some pictures of the gun-toting one and the rocket-toting one together. You really wouldn't like to be on the bad side of either of them, let's be honest. It's not going to be a pretty day for you if you're on the bad side of them. And I'll make sure the last one goes out for this. And I would think I was about right. It is the landing craft we have literally got through alone today. So, I'll have a look at my presentation for the landing ships, and I will organise that. And hopefully it'll come out tomorrow. Now, right then, so landing craft, the summary, and I have written this up just to remind me, and then I'm going to take as many questions as you fancy giving, because I really quite enjoy the questions from you all. I'm sorry to show you my ear. Some lessons to remember. Firepower is needed. You can only dodge so much. This is what I look when I'm looking at modern landing craft and I'm comparing them to what World War II experience was. Look at what they're doing. Look at the firepower they've got. And then look at the modern landing craft. Even the basic landing craft were toting machine guns and all sorts of things to protect them. But look at the firepower they've got for the ones that provide them fire support. Don't expect a landing craft to duke it out with a tank. Please don't. Actually, no. Let me rephrase that. Unless you have one toting 2 25-pounder guns, don't duke it out with a tank. And also, these things don't just appear overnight. The amount of history books, I've got several which I thought were excellent amphibious warfare books, and they are great. But on landing craft, they treat it like they just appear overnight. There was honestly one which seems to suggest the Higgins boat comes from nowhere and is this radical design which randomly appears. And it really doesn't. So why 17-pounders from J. Richardson? Well, because they are the best anti-tank weapon the British have access to. They are absolutely amazing. Apart from when you can get hold of a 25-pounder, which is the 17-pounder on steroids. Now, there are some questions up here which I have missed. So, Force A1, the LCTA and LCTHE meanwhile had 2 Centaur attacks strapped to them. Yes. What I would not like anyone to go away and think that I have been giving you an exhaustive list of landing craft. There are so many different types and variations and modifications built as the war goes on. It's really massive what's happened. Now, I've given you the basic block ones, the ones which were built and designed and made from the get-go and actually went through Director of Naval Constructions and actually had everything properly. But so many are modified as time goes on. You have Admiral Cunningham doing all sorts of modifications to some of the ones he has available for Crete and other operations. You know, theatre commanders have a lot of latitude and things evolve. Richard Mayoff, how do American landing craft compare to British ones? They're quite often the same landing craft. It's not just the Higgins example of the British going and ordering landing craft at the same time as the Americans are ordering landing craft. The Americans often are going, looking at what the British are doing, and the British are looking at what the Americans are doing. What is interesting is that when I was looking at the theory and going on, I was looking at what development the Americans were doing in landing craft. And they do a lot of work with their Marine Corps in the interwar years. But they don't really seem to work on that many landing craft designs, especially not tank-based ones. And I wondered about that, because the British are obsessed with them. But then I look at the history and the write-up of the history, and you have it very much saying that the Americans were far more focused on these things, and the American and the Royal and British weren't. And then I look at this stuff and I'm going, well, the British were obviously focused on it. So I'm wondering if the Americans were actually more focused on it than the write-up takes place and write-up says. I don't know. I'm going to have to investigate further. But what I do know is that the myths, which I've been trying to put down today, are completely wrong. The Royal Navy and the British forces in whole were really looking into amphibious warfare. Jay Risson, 25-pounder makes sense for inland bombardment, but the 17-pounder makes no sense unless there's enemy tanks on the beach. Pretty much the thing was they thought there would be tanks on the beach. They thought that one of the major things they were expecting from both the Germans and the Japanese was a far more active defence. They expected to face armour on the beach. They expected German tanks to be dispatched to charge onto the beaches. Because the British thought that the Germans would fight tooth and nail to hurl them back into the sea. Because that's what the British had been planning to do if the Germans had carried out Operation Sea Lion. They were planning on fighting tooth and nail. They were going to do a sector defence, and then they were going to have reinforcements come in, and they were going to smash them back into the sea. That was the British plan. So they expected the Germans and the Americans agree with the British. That was what they do. So they're expecting the Germans to do the same thing. They're expecting a fierce defence. They're expecting tanks to come charging on the beach. They're expecting to have to take out pillboxes. They're expecting to have smashed defences. They did have to take pillboxes. They did have to smash defences. These guns were useful for that. But they didn't have them how do I put it? They didn't have the tanks that they had to fight. Not there anyway. They still did manage to engage some tanks occasionally in Norway and various river operations. Colinstad and Brook Paint, they did indeed. They had to counterflood ships to give them additional elevation on their guns. They did. They did all sorts of things to get elevation. They landed them, they beached them, they modified the weight arrangements. Commanders of those landing craft were very, very interesting people. They were mostly incredibly adaptive human beings who had a lot of love for modifying their ships. All right, then. Oh, good lord, there's a lot of questions going on. Right then, let's see if I've got to the right point. I have, I think. Right, so nothing says fire support quite like an awful lot of rockets or some really big guns. No, it doesn't, Sheppy. And the nearest German tank on D-Day was miles inland. Rommel and von Bruce argued for months about that. They did. They had decided to keep them inland. No idea. As I said, they were expecting them on the beaches. Jane Peter, when it came to it, I'm very sure every gunner shot whatever they had at whatever they could see, regardless of the true doctrine. In nicest way, that was pretty much British amphibious warfare doctrine. Shoot. If you can see a target, shoot. Just keep shooting. Because ships can't hide. And especially they can't hide when they're close to shore in amphibious warfare. So they have to keep firing. So a destroyer, anything which sees an enemy target, you fire everything you've got at it. Because that's what they have to do. In Greenland, the Germans thought the 25-pounder must be belt-fed. It fired so fast. Yeah, it was, especially what there was a competition at one point during training between the naval crews who'd be manning naval-based 25-pounders and army ones to see who could fire fastest, and it was quite a big competition. The Navy did actually win, but it wasn't by much. Juno 191, but still, why did he need 1,000 rockets at point-blank range? I think in this case, it was to completely demolish the hill the pillbox was built on. It crushed down. Brock Payne question. Can you touch at all on British amphibious operations in Somaliland against the Italians? I've read they were one of the earliest amphibious acts of World War II. Yes, I can do. They mainly took place with the equipment which had already been in Ceylon for exercises and with various merchant ships. So it wasn't really an opposed landing. There weren't much in the way of landing craft there, but there were a lot of troops landed and they did use sloops. Remember, in the 1920s and 30s, often sloops were used for small inshore operations. So they provided fire support. They'd also get the boats and get quite close inshore. So Somaliland is one of those operations where the British are landing quite quickly, but they are landing in a place where they're not going to face much fighting. Force A1, have just checked. LCTR used the 5-inch rockets called Sea Mattress. Yes, that was one type of the rockets they used. There are other options, but mainly Sea Mattress is a good one. Jeff Beeler, Madagascar landing's role in development. Not really that much. Honestly, Madagascar is a bit... basically, there's enough naval firepower there that it overwhelms whatever defences they are facing when they're landing. One of the things the Royal Navy has really picked up in doctrine, when it was doing the exercises in Ceylon, quite often you'd have the China squadron turn out, you'd have various other units turn out to provide a lot of firepower, and they even sometimes got battleships sent from the Mediterranean fleet. So they really, really did practice using the firepower to support it. I take it, Planet 767, I take it the LSTs will be covered in the ocean-going craft. I've covered the LSTs today. Well, no, the landing ship tanks, I think you mean. The landing craft tanks, yes, have been covered today. Landing ship tanks will be covered in the ocean-going craft. They will be. There are a lot of them. Sorry, there are just so many acronyms. A poor dyslexic like me ends up crying at the end of the day after reading all them. Doctrine is important when you are developing something, when you're designing something. Often when you're using it, you have to be more practical. Richard Hughes, was there a flamethrower landing craft? Not officially. Unofficially, I think there were a couple of landing craft which ended up with crocodile turrets attached, i.e. from the Churchill flamethrower tank. But I haven't managed to find a picture of them, so I can't prove it. I can't be 100% certain. It's just something that's written in one of those little accounts of D-Day about a landing craft shooting fire and incinerating a pillbox. The only turret available that could have been fitted would be a crocodile turret, so we'll see. My dad has all sorts of notes. I said I haven't gone into his notes because he died not that long ago, a couple of years ago, and I still haven't managed to get around. I was going through his books, but that was even quite fun. Skywalker Rock, Alexander Clark. How come the British used a spoon bow while US and Japanese used a W-shaped bow on their light landing craft? Pretty much it's the different beaches that they're looking at and how they're looking at different operations. To an extent, the US and Japanese are focused quite a lot on sandy beaches. There are a couple of their beaches which are volcanic and these sort of things. And getting over reefs and these things that they're looking at, and then in terms of their operations, the British are looking at shingly beaches, steeper sandy beaches, different water conditions. This is why you choose the different bows. A Night Heron production. What would an ideal World War II era assault ship in the vein of HMS Fearless and Intrepid look like in your opinion? It would actually look like HMS Fearless and Intrepid. Those ships, I remember you saying those ships had their base in the late 1930s France. They were. In fact, honestly, the only difference is that they could carry 4 big, huge landing craft, and the original ones were being designed to carry 2. Gordon Collins, with all these fire support landing craft, how did Omaha Beach end up going so badly? Omaha Beach is one of those scenarios where you have a lot of things go wrong. We often talk about the tanks, but I think the swimming tanks, there's too much emphasis put on for Omaha Beach. You have to remember with Omaha Beach, it's critical because of where it is in the wider geography. But as a beach to assault itself, it's actually terrible geography to attack. It's the worst one. So if it wasn't because of the wider geography around it, you probably wouldn't have attacked Omaha. So you're always going against that grain. You've always got that problem. And then you've got the problem that, honestly, you would needed more firepower. I think the only thing which could have made a massive difference at Omaha is if they had more landing vehicle tracks there. If they'd had them and they'd been able to use them like they had in the Pacific, because that might have helped them get out. But other than that, you need a lot of firepower in Omaha to have a chance. And they did send a lot of firepower, but it wasn't enough. Schleppy, I think I've answered the question about did they think of putting Churchill Crocodile's flamethrowers on an LC. I've said that found a story about it, but I haven't managed to find a picture or anything official yet, so I can't be 100% sure. Ian Greenlay, again, I think I've actually said that myself. Stop talking about doctrine, it got forgotten the moment they ended action. You made it up as you went along and found what worked. And honestly, doctrine is something which is developed from exercises and experiences and previous experiences prior to war. But the moment you get into battle, you're pretty much firing at whatever gets in front of you. Niger Heron production, or indeed are there any designs for assault ships from the area? Well, funny you asked that. In the same book. And does that look like anything you guys can recognize? And they were first designed, the landing ship docks designed pretty early on. So that's what I'll get to in part 2, which I will hope to do tomorrow, but I'll have to sort out and plan for that. Carl Gorgon, the Americans did not use the same landing craft in the Pacific that they did at D-Day. Why? As I said, it's because of the difference in the oceans, the beaches they're dealing with. You have to always think when these things, what is the best for the suitable conditions we're facing? It's different coasts. And it's one of the interesting issues we have to this day, because honestly, if you look at the American landing craft air cushion, they're big LCACs. They are great for the Pacific. They're not so great for Europe. Okay? The LCUUs the British have are very good for Europe, but they're not so good for the Pacific. So if the British are going to be going out to the South China Sea to help the Americans, we've really not got the great landing craft for that. But if the Americans are coming into Norway, they're going to have to make use of our landing craft to help them get ashore, because they aren't going to bring enough of their LCUs themselves with them. So that's what it happens. Chaffers and Bray, at Dr. Alexander Clark, Japanese even stopped building concrete bunkers as USN doctrine was to get close to the beach and plink them. Yep. Pretty much, you get, if you're close to if you're visible on the beach, you're dead. It's another argument again in the modern Google age against airfields versus aircraft carriers. At least your aircraft carrier moves, your airfield doesn't, and it can be found on Google. And the thing is, you then have to factor in other defenses. You have to work out different ways of how you're going to protect it, and this is the trouble. This is the challenge. At Golden Eagle, at Dr. Alex Clark, I doubt tanks can outfight battleships and cruisers. They really can't. But the British worry was that there'd be so much smoke, there'd be so much flame, there's so much close support needed, that the troops would be so close around them that the tanks charging into them, that the ships which were further away couldn't engage them, which is why you had the landing craft armed, which is why you're relying on destroyers, because the things which get closer will be more likely to be able to engage these things if they got in them. Jamie Peter, Churchill was going to gas the beaches, wasn't he? There were lots of plans for how the British would deal with an amphibious invasion of the UK, and let's be honest, the British were prepared to be very, very ruthless to do it. Colin Stad, at Dr. Alex Clark, I've heard that both USN and RN destroyers beached themselves for direct gunfire support during D-Day. Is this accurate? Yes, lots of ships managed to beach themselves getting close in. It isn't an unknown experience when it comes to amphibious support. Chaffers and Bray, at Dr. Alexander Clark, the reason they didn't have tanks on the coast was due to being terrified of our naval rifles. More than likely. Actually, honestly, it's the nicest way. You could have had tanks, and it would have been a good thing to have tanks strategically, and probably it's your best chance. But honestly, then you're going to lose a lot of tanks. At Dr. Alexander Clark, what kind of use did the British make of LVT Amtracs, if any? Or is that outside the scope, since this is technically a tank lol? Actually, I would love to get into them. The British do get hold of a few. They don't use them that often. And it's one of the things which I think considered as sad, because if they got into the Pacific, they'd have used them far more. Okay? So then we might not have the situation where we have now, where the Royal Marines are very much wedded to the idea of being light infantry. Because I honestly think the Royal Marines should be investing in the US Marine Corps APC program, because I think that makes sense for the Royal Marines, especially if they're going in as the raiding force route. Having a self-propelled vehicle to get out that can organically get them around and give them firepower would make a lot of sense. But after World War II, a lot of all the Royal Marines armoured units were got rid of. They became light infantry, commando focused, and so because they hadn't had the LVTs, because they hadn't really used them as much, they weren't wedded to the idea. Whereas I think if they'd had them and used them more in World War II, they would probably kept them around. And then if you've got equipment capability, you tend to maintain that capability rather than grow a new capability. Tis Francis' fault. Speaking of RN land attack, what's your opinion on the cancellation of RN gun race as a heritage of the RN's involvement in land war or the Boer War? It happens. Honestly, I'd always love it to go ahead, but I can understand it not going ahead at this time. They're encouraging people to stay in. They still want them to stay in because of COVID-19. And you've got to do your best to do that. Chaffers and Bray, at Dr. Alexander Clark. Doctrinally, should it be combat, as in army, a missile fired, or present day, as in separate force, combined ops versus amphibious forces? It's always going to be a combined operation. That was the big lesson the British were proving out in Ceylon and in the South Coast. They were looking at their use of air power, of firepower, everything. Amphibious operations are always a combined operation. It's why you have the duality of command structure, which I plan on doing one. I think it's just been announced on the Falklands War in May, where I'm going to talk about the command structure used and explain the command structure of the Falklands War. And that very much has its roots in World War II. It's what I did for one of my bachelor's dissertations. It's the reason I made friends with Michael Clapp and Julian Thompson, because I went and interviewed them, and I've been friends with them. And I've presented a paper on this at a conference I organised on the Falklands War last year. I helped organise it with my girlfriend, and it was the Falklands 37 conference. We're hoping to get a book out from it and all sorts of things. It was an excellent conference, and it's the paper as I'm going to present is in May, and it goes into all the command structures. Golden Eagle, at Dr. Alexander Clark, why didn't Germans deploy captured Russian tanks on beaches in Sadik bunkers? I have no idea. That would have actually been quite a good idea. At Sheffield 42, at Dr. Alex Clark, what about HMS Revenge hiding using a bombing ray to do some shore bombardment? You know, it's always an idea. Juno 191. So did the Brits do anything like the Americans did with tracked landing craft? The Brits did have various vehicles they were looking at and various things, but the thing is they didn't need them for the operations. They had a lot of landing craft mechanized to take tanks ashore. They had lots of vehicles to dual drive tanks, for example, were some of Hobart's funnies, and they were designed to get themselves ashore. So they had lots of things going on that meant they didn't need the landing vehicle, the LVTs. But again, if you're in the Pacific, you're dealing with a different scenario. Remember, the Pacific have these reefs which go out and all the coral and all sorts of things, which mean you often need those sort of vehicles to get in and get in quickly, because otherwise your landing craft will get destroyed. It's France's fault. Did the Allies ever consider using landing boats craft up the Rhine to take the rear positions? Seems no more risky than D-Day itself. Yes, they did. Force A1. HMS Vindictive at Zeebrugge had flamethrowers fitted. Yes, it wasn't anything new for the Royal Navy to be fitted with flamethrowers. At one point, there were plans for Operation Claymore for Tribal class destroyers to have flamethrowers fitted. They decided it would take too long, though. The biggest trouble you have with all those landing craft fire support ships is that all their magazines are above water storage. So if they get hit by anything, they go boom very quickly. So you have to be quite careful with them. Jay Richardson, what differs between the LCT and the LCM? Always confused, as mechanized and armored are often used interchangeably. Pretty much the amount of weight they can carry. The LCT landing craft tanks were bigger, and they were self-propelled and could get across the ocean themselves in their own way, quite happily. The LCMs couldn't. Golden Eagle, at Dr. Alexander Clark, why didn't Germans deploy captured Russian tanks on beaches in static bunkers? I've answered that one. Okay. One German captured D-Day was a Manchurian Chinese who'd already served in the Japanese and Red Armies, twice captured before ending up in the work match. Ah, cool. Thank you, Ian. Skywalker Rock, at Dr. Alex Clark, what were the major design concerns of Pacific versus European landing craft design, other than stone versus sand beaches? Different tidal ranges and the various wave heights. All these things had a major factor in how you're designing them. Ian Greener, Field Marshal Alan Brooke in his book said Churchill several times late at night, drunk as a skunk, ordered the RAF to drop anthrax on Germany. The RAF ignored him. I'm not quite sure about that one. Honestly, Churchill wasn't quite that vindictive, and he didn't get that drunk. Well, no, let's put it this way. Churchill could drink most men on the line. For him to get drunk enough to start doing random orders like that because he was drunk would require a lot of alcohol. A tremendous lot of alcohol. Right. Juno 191 at Dr. Alexander Clark. How many rocket landing craft were there on D-Day? All the footage I watched seems to have a lot. There were a lot. I think it's about 60, but I'm not 100% sure, because The thing is, and this is what happens with the gunships, they are technically delivered too late. They are being delivered right up to the time of D-Day. And some of them are actually delivered prior to D-Day and technically commissioned after D-Day, so you'd expect them not to be there, but their crews get awards for being at D-Day. So in other words, their ships must have been there. So I think some ships were actually being literally taken over by their crews and taken straight down towards D-Day, and then they were commissioned properly afterwards, and they did the ceremony afterwards. So that's why I'm saying 60-ish. Jeff Beeler, what amphibious exercises did the Royal Marines do between wars? The Royal Marines took part in every amphibious exercise. So, in fact, the Royal Marines were taking part in the ones at Ceylon. They were taking part in the ones in the South Coast. And they were also doing actual amphibious operations. Companies of Royal Marines were being used, dropped off sloops in the Shanghai incidents and various other things. So, Royal Marines were being used for a lot of amphibious operations. They just weren't practicing big brigade level ones. They weren't formed up in a brigade. That wasn't their role prior to World War II. A Golden Eagle at Dr. Alice Clark. I feel it's a shame no battleships were available in the Falklands. I envisage, if Sandy were daring enough, send the battleships on night bombard raid versus Rio Grande Air Base. You didn't need to wait for a battleship for that, and trust me, he was thinking about it. At Golden Eagle, at Dr. Isaac Clark. No, that guy was Korean, not Chinese. Good lord, even more troubling. Jay Richardson, was there any World War II version of a Mexifloat? There were a lot of different ideas which would develop into the Mexifloat, but they weren't really there yet. They certainly weren't powered to the extent that they were supposed to be found. Greg Stakowski, Dr. Isaac Clark, how did the landing craft deal with hedgehogs and other obstacles? Mostly by bashing into them, but there were also these people called mine clearance divers going ahead blowing stuff up as well, and army engineers as well. Almost caught up. And Dr. Alex Clark, any naval brigades involved in the exercise or invasion? In the exercises, yes. In the invasion, no. In the exercises, again, you'd often get company side. You'd get a sort of company of Royal Marines, a company strength formation from a load from a cruiser, would form the beach team, and the beach party on the beach would hit it first, and then the brigade would go through them. Okay, as we got into the debate of Exocets versus battleships, it would depend on the battleship and where the Exocet hit. That is the honest question. If the Exocet hit the belt armor at its thickest point, the Exocet wasn't designed to engage a battleship with belt armor. All right. So, we did get through all these. Now, I will look into putting on the one about landing ships, amphibious ships, tomorrow. It'll either be tomorrow or Sunday. The only reason I say it might not be tomorrow, it might be Sunday, is because whilst I know you all would hope it to be tomorrow, it might be Sunday because it depends on what my family has planned for Bank Holiday Friday. They might have got building work for me planned because I am the muscle when it comes to family building. My sister, as I've said, is a civil engineer. She has the ideas. She does have the ideas. And I am the muscle and I do the building. So if I'm doing building, it probably won't be tomorrow afternoon. It'll be Sunday. But if it is, it'll be tomorrow. And if it is tomorrow, not Sunday, then I will have a video which will come up on Sunday, which is about Japan and the British relationship between Japan and Britain from 1902 to 1939. I hope you've all enjoyed it. Thank you again to everyone who has subscribed. Thank you again to everyone who's a patron. Thank you again so much for people who give me the familial bragging rights. That really has meant a lot to me. It's a lot of fun. And I hope you've enjoyed Landing Craft. I hope it's made it more interesting for you, because Landing Craft are very, very cool. Not enough Marines though. Well, say Rolf, I will explain that. Literally, I've done that because I will do specials on the various amphibious operations as they come up over time. I chose to do Landing Craft, and I said I'll do another one on landing ships because they have been so, how do I put it, forgotten, so written about. When you talk about the history of amphibious warfare, the landing craft often go, they just got to sit ashore. And they don't talk about what they did. Yes, it is France's fault. It was your video request. So that is why this is focused on landing craft, and that is why I'm talking about landing ships next time. Because when I was looking for it, I was planning, the original one I had planned was going to be talking about the amphibious operations and the craft using them. And then I realized there were so little sources out there for people to go and actually look at the landing craft which were being used, that it would be better for me to do a video about the landing craft, and then as time went on, do videos on the amphibious operations so that you had a reference to go back to for the landing craft. So when I'm talking about them, they're not just LCT-8 and you're going, what do you mean by an LCT-8? You can now go back and look into this and go, I mean something which was halfway house between the LCT-3 and the LCT-4, which was designed as a hybrid for the war. What was it coming on? Golden Eagle, at Dr. Clark, how did they supply all the ammunitions and fuel? Oh, that was what the Atlantic convoys were all about. That is what a lot of the convoy operations were about. And Jay Richardson at Golden Eagle, a lot of prefabrication was involved. Anyway, thank you very much to everyone, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you've had a good time, and it is France's fault. Oh, in regards to exocet missiles and battleships, I mean, it could take it out of battle, not sink. Again, it would depend where it hit it, but yes, it could be a mission kill. Anyway, take care. Thank you very much for listening. And I hope to see you all again when I next have one of these, which is, as I said, there is one scheduled definitely for Tuesday, which is on ship messing and how people, where they ate on ships. And as I said, I will factor in the landing ship one of this half of this presentation, either Friday or Sunday. And if it's Friday, on Sunday there'll be a pre-recorded video coming out. Take care and have a nice evening. Thank you very much for watching. Juno 191, Dr. Clark, just off question, what would you think of a Shan Horse movie? It could be fun as long as it ends in the Battle of North Cape. Take care. Thank you.